Hey guys, it's Kerry, and last week we talked about me spending $84,450 to upgrade the rental home, to actually make it rental ready. That included upgrades such as the kitchen, the AC upgrade, and solar panels and batteries. This week we're really just going to get into the results of that and the good and the bad side of that, and even the surprise spike in electric bills that I was not expecting to get from my tenant. I will also show you the full picture of my actual net profit or loss for the actual 9 months that the tenant was renting in 2025, and just showing you the complete picture. The first thing I really want to start with is just the moving out process and listing it for rent, because there's a little bit of logistics when it comes to that. So I ended up listing the property with the same property manager, who was also the person that was my real estate agent as well. So I had that same person list my property while I was still living there. And I also staged the property like after I moved out. The staging cost was like around 500, but it's not really anything to move the needle here. But it is just to let you guys know there is a cost to like staging the property to be presented to other buyers. And it was interesting because one of the things that I noticed right away is that the showings were pretty consistent. She was able to get people to come to the property like at least every week, and like three or four people would be interested in reviewing the property every week. There was one time that I was living at home, and the visitor didn't necessarily coordinate with the property manager on when they wanted to show up, so I was just in the house doing whatever I was doing, and I get a random car that pulls up to the house, and I'm like, okay, what is this? They ring the doorbell and say, oh, it's here to visit. And I'm like, oh man, I'm not supposed to be seen while they're visiting the house, so I don't want to introduce any bias. But other than that, like one interesting like scenario, which they didn't even end up being in the house anyway, wasn't the best candidate, I would say. Anyway, so it was just interesting, that one tidbit, but I can't fault the property manager. They just didn't listen. The other thing I'll say as well, in that process, obviously we moved out. So for me to move out, I actually talked to you guys about RSUs, or restricted stock units, in my first video. And I want to just make sure that you also know what that is. So that's just essentially stock that the company grants you as part of your compensation that you get after a certain amount of time of being at the company. So my stock was vesting around that same time, and I was able to use this as a down payment to a future home. So we were looking around a January time, and this time that we were also looking, it's the same time we were looking to put the house on the market. So it just kind of worked out in a way that I was able to get interest in the property before I left, and also after I left, that we were able to show it a few times and then get the tenant to actually come on to the property and be interested during that time. But I know I'm getting a little bit off track here. The thing I wanted to really just say is like that helped me as a down payment for that home. And we'll get into that later on. Not today, not this week, but at some point in the future. But I just wanted you to be able to put together the full picture of where I was going in this process. And the other thing I'll say is we did move out in March to that second property, and there was a vacant time between March and I believe late April, in which there was nobody in that house. And it was not that bad actually while the home was empty, because I had the solar panels on there and I was able to sell energy back to the grid. It had negative bills at the time. So I was chilling. Like obviously I had to pay the mortgage, but that was expected. So I floated those 2 months. But during that time that I moved out, the lease was signed pretty shortly after. So I knew there was a tenant coming in. So the tenant actually ended up signing the lease in late March. And then the tenant actually ended up moving in like March 29th. And during that time, it really wasn't vacant for too long. So the thing that I kind of really noticed is that the immediate curb appeal upgrades, or the upgrades that kind of improve quality of life, such as the kitchen upgrade and the lawn, kind of really help like bring interest to the property and make people feel like it was worth the high end of the market, because I was priced at the higher end of the market where I had the rental home at. And it was nice to be able to justify that price to get somebody to actually move into there. The only thing that I had to do as well was the agreement with the property manager to find me a tenant, which I think was well worth it, was just to pay 50% of the first month's rent as commission. So that was a loss right there, but I think it was well worth it to have me have a good tenant that I know is going to be screened, and I don't have to go out and find them myself and deal with the relations myself. Now on to the maintenance part of the home. So when it came to the tenant moving in and just getting things established, one of the first things that broke right away was the garage door. The garage door spring literally just snapped. My property manager took me a picture of it, and I was just in disbelief because nothing seemed wrong with it when I moved out. But this was something that was handled very easily. It cost me $350 though, and I went ahead and paid it to the property manager. Well, actually, she just took it out the rent, and then she was able to pay for it. And I just got less money for the rent that month, and that made that process go about smoothly. And then the next thing that happened is the tenant also said within that same month that the AC was not working, and it was just really weird. I reset the thermostat, so I didn't know if something weird was going on. So I went ahead and called the AC company that actually had the unit under warranty, because remember, I just bought it less than a couple of years ago and it has a warranty for 10 years parts and labor. So I went ahead and called them, paid for a service call to come out there, because if nothing's wrong with it, then they're going to charge you a service call. So they get out there, they come to the property, they send me a picture of it and send me all of the information and say the unit's running fine. And to me, that was just kind of weird. I was like, okay, then why did they say that it was broken? When I got the report back and went ahead and paid the 75 directly and called it a day, and the tenant hasn't complained about it since. Just was a little odd to me. Maybe they didn't know how to use the thermostat. The other thing that happened is like coming in like 2 or 3 months later, they had a drainage issue where the drain was not draining correctly. So I had to go ahead and my property manager go ahead and let me know that I can get somebody out to fix it, but that was another $200 down the drain. So I would say just really off the bat, the maintenance wasn't too terrible. It was only 625, but it's just something to keep in mind whenever you're getting into real estate and having tenants and just having a property in general. You're going to have maintenance, things are going to break, and it just is what it is. But I'll say here it wasn't really too bad, but I just wasn't expecting it to happen so quickly. On to the next thing. So one thing I didn't really account for before I put the property up for rent was that I didn't really think that it was going to be less expensive to rent than it would be to get a mortgage. And one of the things that I kind of talked with my property manager about, and she was just telling me like, normally people don't rent their homes out within the first year or two, and you usually wait a couple of years for the rents to catch up to rent out. And I was thinking I could just buy and rent because renting is always more expensive than getting a mortgage. Little did I know, just because of the unique circumstances of 2022, I bought the home at 6.35%, 6.375% actually, interest rate on the mortgage. So that was kind of high considering like a lot of people locked in mortgages of like 3% or even lower, probably less than 2 years ago prior to that. So the rents just haven't really caught up. So I could only rent it out at 2,500 a month maximum, but my mortgage is 2,730. So right there out the gate, I am already looking at the math here, $230 in the hole every month. And just to break that mortgage payment down, the $817 of it is actually the taxes and insurance. So when it comes to a mortgage, you have three parts. You have the principal, the interest, which is bundled together because that's technically tied to the loan of the home. And then you got the things that are in escrow, which are used to pay for things that just come along with your mortgage, and that's the taxes and insurance. So the taxes and insurance together divided by 12 for the year is $817. So it was just interesting just seeing that gap and knowing that I had to do something about it. So this is where I came to be creative, talking to my property manager, and I was like, what we could do is I am giving them a benefit with the solar panels. Ideally, they shouldn't have a bill because my bill has been pretty low, almost like zeroed out if I was able to use my energy correctly, and I have an electric vehicle. So we came up with the fact that it's like, okay, well, the only other utility that the rental property has is water. So we'll say that the utilities are included except water, and we'll just charge them $300 a month. So in my head, I'm like, that's great. So I'll be making money off of selling energy back to the grid, and the mortgage itself will actually be covered because now I'm charging $2,800 and the mortgage is $2,730. It's barely break even, but it works for me. To give more details about me selling energy back to the grid, I'm with Tesla Electric actually at the property right now, and I switched to them in like November 2023 when they became available. And at first the plan was really just to sell energy back at a fixed rate, kind of like Rhythm Energy or different other providers that they have. But in 2024 of May, I was actually able to join the virtual power plant where they sell your energy back to the grid at the market rates, and they give you 90% of the profit, they take 10. The thing that was interesting is that when I was living there from January until March of 2025, my bills were pretty low. Like my December bill of 2024 was $67. My January bill was $51. And then my February bill was 104. During the vacancy period when I moved out and the house was empty, I actually saw negative bills. So I got money back from the grid that I could cash out. And in March, it was like negative $87. February is negative $140. And then May, it was negative $43. And just to keep in mind, there is a lag. So typically you get billed for the previous month, which is why even though the tenant's in there, it's still negative because it's looking at the previous months. So in my head, this was working great because now when a tenant gets in there, it might not be as negative, but it should be zero or barely any money or a little bit less money because they don't have an electric vehicle like I do. But when they moved in and the bill started rolling around, the first bill that they kind of had out that started costing me money once the free energy credits kind of dried up over time was in July. The first bill was $150. The second bill was $150 again. And I'm rounding here. I'll have the exact numbers on the screen for those who are interested. The next bill in September was $175 and it went up even higher. Like October, it had a high of $285 roughly. And then January, which hasn't even hit my pockets yet, but it was $330. So it was just interesting because I average around 2,000 kilowatt hours to 2,500 kilowatt hours a month, and that's including my car. The tenant themselves in October, that big month I told you about, hit 4,427 kilowatt hours in October. Mind you, that they're consistently using 2 to 3 times the amount of energy that I'm using. Granted, I was in there with myself, one other person, and a dog. So I thought that was still pretty reasonable, but the tenant has 3 people on the lease. So maybe that was the reason that they had a little bit more electricity usage. But I even talked with my HVAC guy, told him the situation is going on. And he was like, that unit that you got shouldn't be using that much energy. And looking at it, I don't think it was even the AC. I think they have some floor heaters or different stuff going on. And it just surprised me because I did not expect for them to be racking up super high bills. And it was something that I was like, I need to figure out how to change this because I do have a buffer of $300 a month. But now we can even see they're exceeding that buffer on a monthly basis. And, I incentivize them, I guess, to use as much as they can because I told them it was unlimited. But now I feel like I'm regretting that decision. But before I go too far off the rails with just that one loss that I'm seeing right now in front of my face directly, I want to go ahead and just compare the full numbers over the 9 months and just take everything that I can, considering like all of the variables that I could, excluding like property taxes, those change over time, but we're going to take them as I'm seeing them right now. And we're going to have that period be from April to December of 2025. So that's 9 months. So if we go ahead and do the math, my income is $22,500 just from the rent alone. And we are going to have also $2,700 that's collected for the unlimited electricity. And that totals to $25,200 coming in from the tenant. The other expenses that we have is the mortgage interest, the property taxes, insurance, the property manager also has to be paid, the maintenance on a few things that I listed earlier. Then we got the solar loan interest. Then we got the electricity bills that I had to end up paying out of pocket. And then we have the loss of the solar panels amortized over the lifespan of the panels, which is 25 years. And the reason that I have this is just because the solar panels themselves only keep a certain percentage of their value. And because of that, we have to just consider that some of it would just be lost off of just it not being worth as much as it is if I wanted to sell the home or get a equity loan out of it. So totaling all those expenses together, we're at $27,616 for the year. So the actual cash flow itself is negative $2,416 for the 9 months. So month to month on average, that's $268. And that's kind of what it felt like is I got to pay $268 just to keep the home as it is. But that's not the full picture, right? The full picture that we're seeing is that I also have to consider that I paid down on the mortgage. I also have to consider that I paid down on the solar principal because I did not just buy the solar panels in cash as we covered before. So when it comes to the equity, I had $3,694 that in mortgage principal that I paid down, and then also $1,539 on the solar principal that I paid down. And we also got to consider that the solar panels increase the home value. And I'm going to say for the solar panels, just to give a rough estimate, because there's a million different calculations you could do, and I don't think it's very useful to just bore you guys with that here. I'm going to say the solar panels are going to be $40,000 added to the home value. And that's kind of where we got earlier at the $390 loss, which is a $13,000 value loss on the solar panels. And that's where we got the $390 a month solar loss. So when we go ahead and take the amortized value added every year, it's about $1,600. And then we have it to do that over 9 months. So it's $1,200 added to the home value just for the solar panels by themselves. So when you put that together on a complete picture, even though I have 2,416 in cash flow being lost, I'm building 5,233 in equity, and I'm also having a $1,200 home increase. So I'm actually net positive $4,000 for the year, even though I have a current cash flow of 2,416 to keep this as it is. So it was interesting because obviously I'm paying a little bit of money every month to keep things going, but in the long run, I'm actually building equity, which is something that I will be able to leverage in the future, whether I sell the home or whether I take out money from the home in a form of like a loan to take out the equity. It is a lesson that I kind of learned here, because if I just look at it at face value, I would have been like, well, the solar panels was just a bad idea, because I ended up paying extra money, and the tenant still ended up making me pay for electricity anyway. But in the long run, it's still interesting because I'm still winning in the long run. And that's something that's important to me, but it doesn't mean that I can't improve and make myself even more cash flow positive at not even more cash flow positive, but make myself cash flow positive. And that's what we're going to get into next, is just two things that I'm kind of taking away from this, just to make things a little bit easier on my day to day. Because I know long term I'm building wealth, but it is easier to be able to have positive cash flow while I'm building that wealth. The first thing, as you could have guessed, is that I'm gonna limit the amount of electricity that they can use. So I'm still going to have the $300 a month in electricity, and that's going to be used to have a certain amount of electricity that they can use. And if they go over, then I'm going to charge them a certain amount. So I'm going to go ahead and read off here what it would be, to be specific for those who are just curious. So we're going to have the months of May to August would be capped at 2,500 kilowatts hours a month. And then September to March will be 2,000 kilowatt hours a month, since those are cooler months. And then anything over those caps will be charged at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And based off of the usage, which I will put on the screen here, you'll see that like April to July, they were under the cap. And in August, they were slightly over. And then September to November, they were way over the cap. But with this cap enforced, I would have been looking at $953.70. And the impact that it would have been is like, instead of a $523 loss, it would be $431 gains. And the $523 loss is subsidized by the equity that I build in the solar panels, put in the back. So it's just like, that's a big difference on that gain, to be able to mitigate that feeling of like having to pay that utility bill and being able to kind of be a little bit more cash flow positive. It's just interesting because a cap like that just enforces them to either conserve energy, or you're going to pay more for it, which I think is the right thing to do, because I don't want to incentivize them to use as much electricity as they can, because I'm trying to give it to them as a benefit for something that they don't necessarily have to directly deal with anymore, to have a little bit of a cheaper rate because you have those solar panels on the home. The other one that I don't necessarily have the most control over, but was something I was thinking about long term that I thought I would have been able to do by now. As I said before, 6.375% mortgage interest rate in 2022 is what I locked myself in as. And the principal and interest on that is $1,990. So with that, I was not thinking, I have the loan through Navy Federal, and Navy Federal actually offers me the home buyer's choice loan. And with that loan, I have an option to pay $250 to lower my rate without having to refinance. And for those who are familiar, refinancing actually is like closing on a home again. So there'll be closing costs and different things like that. And this makes it a lot cheaper because I don't have to go through that whole process, and I get to keep the same loan terms and just lower the rate. And even with the 1% rate drop, that'll save me at least $200 a month on just principal and interest alone, which would actually bring me back down pretty close to filling that initial gap on the market, in which I was basically having to come out of pocket to pay that mortgage. One thing to note though is that property taxes and insurance is a part of the actual mortgage itself. And when it comes to that, those typically increase every year because the property tax is tied to the value of your home. And insurance is going to go up if the value of your home goes up because it's more expensive to replace or insure that property now that it's worth more. The one thing I will say is I had to transition out, right? I transitioned out from being a homeowner to being a landlord, and that policy for the insurance actually transitions to now what's called a landlord policy. The landlord policy is typically cheaper than the homeowner policy because they don't have to insure as much because you're not worried necessarily about the valuables in there. It's more about insuring against if anything happens on the property. And that makes the property insurance really just kind of drop a little bit. But honestly, most times it's going to be eaten up by the homestead exemption. And a homestead exemption is an exemption, at least in Texas, that you can claim on the property that you live at to lower the taxes on the property that you live at. And typically those balance each other out. I just wanted to mention that to kind of give you the entire picture. I'm not going to really get into that now because taxes on different things can kind of just be its own little topic, but I do want to at least give you the opportunity to know so you can go and look these things up for yourself. When it comes to combining these two things that we talked about, I can't just magically get myself the 1% rate drop, but rates could drop sometime soon. It's just still nice to at least plan it. And I know this is part of my long-term plan. And if I can get that 1% rate drop along with implementing the caps, if we were to have that happen for last year, it would have given me $3,354 more back into my pocket to offset that $2,416. So I would have been at a much better position or felt like I was in a much better position because I didn't really have cash coming out of my pocket. So it's something that I'm just thinking long term to keep in mind. I'll just keep my eye on the rates, keep calling Native Federal to see if they hopefully drop. But these are the two things. And the one of them, the first one I can actually implement. The second one, I'm just waiting on the event that I can actually exercise that option. And these are the two things that I'm just taking away from myself as what I could have done better. One thing I will say is that picking the right property manager is very important. For me, I would say it really helped out the process. I have not been back to that house since March of 2025 when I moved out. The property manager was able to help me find a tenant that went all smoothly, handled the contract and the legal work, really handled all of the small things, communications that needed to be done with the tenant. And it was just really helpful because the things like the AC going out or the internet going out, which I am in a weird predicament where I'm directly paying for the internet and they're paying through the property manager for the internet because I just need to make sure that the internet is provided for the solar system. Don't ask me why it works that way, but it voids the warranty if it's not on the internet. So it just is what it is. But it was just interesting because all of those little nuances and things that happen were able to be solved by me just contacting the vendor in some scenarios where I was closer with the vendor and just having them coordinate with the property manager, or the property manager is literally just able to pay for the services needed, and then she just takes it out the rent that is going to be sent to me to pay herself back. And this process just really made things smooth for me because it was really truly like a passive thing. I just had to make decisions that affected finances, and it just really helped to alleviate that and make it truly a passive income. And I just want to highlight that it's just super duper important to make sure that you have the right thing in place. Like, of course, you can do it without a property manager, but it's a lot more work. And my goal here was to have a passive stream of income because I'm working on different things. And it's just, once again, I just really want to stress that it's just really important to make sure that you're set up with the right people to help you succeed when it comes to these types of things. And I will also link her business in my description below at Above and Beyond. And I highly recommend. For me, at this time, I'm paying $75 for a month for the service. Right. For her finding a tenant, like I said before, it was 50%. Obviously, things can change as time goes on because this video you can be watching it at any given time. But this is just what I paid because I'm always going to be transparent with you guys. And I just highly recommend you check her out if you're in need of a property manager or a real estate agent as well. Fast forwarding to today, you typically have to give a like 60-day renewal notice, and the tenant needs to let you know also during the 60 days if they're going to stay or leave. And the tenant let the property manager know that they're probably going to leave because they need to downsize because one of their people that were living with them were just moving back home. This was one of the things where it was interesting because I talked to the property manager. I was like, okay, so does that mean I need to be prepared to split half a month's rent to find a new tenant and the staging costs? And the property manager is so good that she was like, well, actually, talking with the tenant now, they might have a family member move in, take over, not take over lease, but move in to start the new lease. And you don't even have to stage the property again to show between tenants. And I was like, oh, this is great. So I'm prepared for either way, but this is something that I just wanted to keep you guys up to speed on what's going on today as we're getting close to the renewal because the lease is only 1 year. Pretty much the last piece I'll say when it comes to the updates on the rental property. One other thing I do want to say is that this really taught me this first year, even though it's really been 9 months, it just taught me that real estate, it isn't always going to go the way you expect it to go. Sometimes it requires a little bit of problem solving and to put systems in place to ensure that going forward you won't be able to be in as weird of a position as I kind of was. And we can see that it still works out even on paper today, but I still don't want to have negative cash flow if I can help it. And now I'm learning to put different systems in place because it just gets a little weird when you add electricity bills into the mix because that's something that can vary. And you just want to set yourself up to be in a position where no matter what happens, you'll be all right. Now, I know we've been deep into real estate in this episode and the past few episodes before that. And it was just about me telling you my process of buying my first property, upgrading it and renting it out. And that's just a lot that kind of goes into that. But I do want to tell you about something that was happening in parallel at the same time. In fall of 2023, I took my first steps into entrepreneurship while I was making these upgrades to the property. I started my first business that is outside of real estate because real estate itself is also a business with a partner. And this business was about having portable phone chargers from vending machines that could be placed at venues to be rented by patrons as a perk to the venue, but also something that I can make money off of while people rented it out. And this business was called Brick. We're going to take a break from the real estate stuff for a little while. I wouldn't even say a little while, but we're definitely going to take a break from it. And I'll just show you how I started the business and how I ended up doing a launch in February of 2024 and what happened long term when things got a little rough. And unfortunately, I ended up having to buy my business partner out because they no longer had the time and just kind of see how that business is going. The business itself was definitely interesting because it definitely did not go the way I thought it was going to go. And it's not always a bad thing, but it's definitely some lessons that I've learned along the way there. And it just goes to show that trying to build multiple streams of income doesn't always go as planned. But as usual, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. And I'm just curious on you guys then, for those who are landlords or those of you who even have just opinions about it, what do you think is the biggest gap between the rental plan and reality? And do you even think that I'm looking at this right, considering the full picture on my end? I just want to hear your thoughts. And as usual, this is Carrie on the Mickens Financial Journey YouTube channel. Peace out.